Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel, coming off of a 27-6 win against the Jets. Certainly a little bit unexpected in terms of the final score. We'll talk about everything from the game, but Chargers pick up a huge win. Can't overstate how big this one was. Obviously, there's where the Jets and the Chargers are in the wild card standings, but picking up a big AFC win itself is huge here. And now the Chargers sit, I think, one game out of the final wild card spot behind the Browns and a couple other teams. The Bills are also at 5-4. So, now going forward, the Chargers, kind of have everything they want in front of them. Obviously, they're going to play the Bills and a couple other of these AFC teams in general who are, in this playoff hunt. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But, I sort of questioned after the Bears, right? Like, how much of this stuff is transferable from week to week in terms of the things that the Chargers, had improved on in that game. And I think they brought, this is a good Jets team. Like, and honestly, it's why I picked the Jets against the Chargers initially. The Jets defense gave the Chargers a lot of problems and gave Herbert a lot of things to deal with. And, you just saw like how well coached they are in that regard. The offensive side of the ball with Zach Wilson is a little bit tougher for the Jets, but I do think this is a good football team that they beat today, and to do it on the road in the way that they did it in a primetime game, I think is probably definitely the most impressive win of the season. I would say that much in that regard, and I think when we talk about Staley defensive games, this was probably my favorite Staley defensive game since Miami last year. Not Miami this year. Oh, God, no. But it's probably since the Miami game of last year, where it just felt like from the first quarter to the fourth quarter, and Staley said that in his press conference, like they were in control. And I think that was a different feeling than the Chargers, like defense kind of constantly like having to play on their back foot, like just, it felt like they were aggressive tonight, certainly in terms of the pressure they were getting. But again, this was a really good Chargers performance just against, a wild card contender. So I thought that this was really nice to see for the team. It clearly feels like, I know a lot of people on Twitter talk about the celebration committee stuff, and some people probably think it's cringe, certain people out there, but it does also feel like, and I can only say this in terms of, just what I'm watching on the screen, right? I can't necessarily quantify this to the all 22 yet in terms of the Jets game, but it does feel like the Chargers are playing a lot looser as a pass rush, as a defense. And I think even just kind of like when they have to have a play on offense, right, they end up getting it, and there's a little bit of momentum gained in that regard. So certainly the defense is playing a hell of a whole lot looser. So let's start with the defense. This was probably the best like overall pass rushing game of the season for the Chargers. They end up bringing down Zach Wilson 8 times for 8 sacks. You could argue a couple of those were Zach Wilson inflicted injuries, just in terms of him walking into sacks and stuff. But the final pressure numbers in this game end up being Tuli with 5 pressures, Mack with 4, Bosa with 3. Bosa, of course, comes away with 2.5 sacks. Sebastian Joseph Day and Fox each with 2, and Otito Bonya coming back at the end of the game there, and Williams each have 1. So yeah, you have in total, if I'm adding this up correctly, carrying the 2, the Chargers got 17 pressures tonight. So I thought that was just really good to see from a defensive standpoint, obviously. And you just like can quantify like which players are kind of picking up steam throughout the season. And the face of that to me is Joey Bosa right now, because Joey Bosa, I think coming out of the Bears game, I think he had a really good game, but I think he even looked healthier right in this game. Daniel Popper pointed this out in his Athletic article when he did the film breakdown of Joey Bosa and his performance against the Bears last week. But it just feels like he is a quarter of a second faster off of the line. And, when you have that get off and you have that ability to like continue to drive through, now that he's kind of unimpeded by his toe injury or his hamstring injury and some of these things that have been nagging at him this season, like it does feel like he is a very, very different player. And so the Chargers, Bosa now through the last 2 weeks, if I'm adding up his numbers correctly from last week with this week, would be 8 pressures and 3.5 sacks, which honestly feels like less than what he's actually created because, obviously he'll open up some opportunities for Morgan Fox and Khalil Mack and Tuli. But, this was a really awesome Joey Bosa game where it just felt like, gets a strip sack. It just felt like he was in Zach Wilson's face all night. Even I honestly think the reason it kind of feels light on the stats is that they also got Joey Bosa on what I think should have been another pressure on that roughing the passer call early in the game, and that gave the Jets a free 15 yards, which take it, I guess, because they weren't putting up points the rest of the night anyway. But I don't know. I thought that call was kind of just whack on a number of levels. I didn't think he was that late, but regardless, he does get the good amount of pressure. And so it was nice to just see a Joey Bosa game again where you're reminded of that 2021 type of player, where the type of impact that he was just putting up from game to game. Tuli obviously leads the team in pressures, gets a pretty big sack in this one, and I just got to say, really impressed with him and everything he's been doing in the pass rush. It's crazy. Sorry, I ended up having 2 sacks. That's right. 1 quarterback hit. So yeah, and 1 pass deflection. Am I reading the numbers right? No, sorry, I was confusing that with Max numbers. 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 2 QB hits on Tuli's resume tonight. So thought that was just really nice to see. From, again, a pass rush standpoint, Khalil Mack, 2 sacks, 1 tackle for loss, and Mack had 4 pressures as well. So just a really complete complementary game when we talk about the pass rush. I think there's been weeks where it's like, okay, well, this guy's walling out, but, this guy's injured in terms of Bosa, or a game where Bosa's been out. Tuli and Mack have been really good. So, I think all 3 of them firing on all cylinders all the time, and then occasionally having somebody like Morgan Fox come into the game. I mean, that Fox, Tuli, Bosa, Mack package that they have is clearly their best pass rushing package. And when it's activated, it usually ends up working. Obviously, again, this is the Jets offensive line, and you can, cap that performance with that if you want to. But I did think this was, again, legitimately 2 back-to-back, like very good pass rushing efforts. So, hopefully, again, Bosa and all these guys really carry that momentum on as they play the Lions next week. Obviously, that's going to be a big game, and then the Ravens shortly after that. So, yeah, no, I was just really impressed with how the team played as a whole, how the defense played as a whole. Moving on to, I would say the secondary first. Alohi Gilman ends up having just like an insane game, ends up punching out a fumble, ends up returning a fumble. We always kind of talked about him as like a player that is always, around like the turnover, always around the chaos on defense whenever it happens. And it was just really nice to see him in this game kind of embrace that role, kind of play very freely, hit hard. And him and Derwin definitely, this was the best Derwin and Alohi game where they're like both firing kind of on that level, whether it was just like making a physical hit stick near the line of scrimmage, forcing a fumble, whatever it was. I think this was definitely the best safety game I've seen from the Chargers in a while. And I don't think it's coincidental that like, okay, they're, both finally feeling healthy, like we talked about the pass rush for the first time this season, and they both finally kind of get to play together, and that's what it looks like. And again, good game for Derwin. Again, not like he got a ton of balls thrown his way, considering the night Zach Wilson had, but I did think this was a pretty good tackling night for him. We'd seen some games with some bad penalties, some missed tackles. that Derwin's taken. And so for him to not, I think he did get one penalty called against him in this one, but for him to not, commit like a big hit penalty that could have shifted the tone of the game or whatever, like I think that's like a pretty good from the Chargers standpoint. If you get this Derwin Alohi tandem for kind of the rest of the year. And so I'll also give credit to Brandon Staley for this defensive game where I felt like, just kind of like mixing up the fronts and the packages that he was sending and, really having it felt like this was the first game that Brandon Staley had faith in his secondary in a while. Was Zach Wilson part of that? Maybe for sure. But whether it was Michael Davis traveling with Garrett Wilson, like they always seem pretty confident in that. I know Wilson ended up finishing with, let me see here, about 7 receptions for 80 yards on 13 targets. But, regardless of like who was covering him at a certain time, Michael Davis or, the safeties that would come out to kind of help on him, or, whether it was Asante on a certain play. Asante was kind of on Lazard and some other guys too. But it did feel like the Chargers just felt very confident, even going against a guy who is as good as Garrett Wilson is, of just trusting their players in the secondary versus obviously, I will say the Chargers didn't do the prevent defense stuff today because they kind of did on occasion and did some of the soft zone concepts. But I actually think that helped them in this game because of the opponent they were playing and like the style of defense that they needed to play. Again, if you do that against the Chiefs and Cowboys, like it's not going to work out as well as opposed to, having to play that like physical style. But even with playing some of that, soft zone man hybrid scheme, I did think they allowed for Derwin James. They allowed for Alohi Gilman to have like their best game certainly together in the season. And it also helps when the pass rush is, of course, as good as it was tonight. Couple other notes just on the defense. Like I said, they were giving Zach Wilson hell. Don't need to get into that too much. But this was one of their better run defense games. And again, we keep talking about the Chargers of like, when is this like run defense going to crack? But we now have really an 8-game sample size where they're one of the best run defenses in the league, which again, is not a sentence that I thought I would ever utter on this podcast, on this YouTube channel, on this platform. And it ends up being 20 carries for 64 yards. Now, the Jets run game is kind of impeded by the fact that they go down 14-0 early. So just from a game script perspective, like there wasn't a ton of time, especially in the second half, to like let things going and let Breece Hall get momentum. But the Chargers also like stopped him from getting momentum. 16 carries for 50 yards, averaging 3.1 per. Dalvin Cook only had 2 carries. Zach Wilson had 2 carries where he ran. But, the Chargers kind of, getting up in that game early from a special teams and offense standpoint allowed the defense to cook certainly in the run game. And I think even if it was like a closer game throughout, you can trust the sample of what the Chargers have put out on defense, specifically in the run game, to, the way that they're hitting their gaps, the way that they're getting into their fits. It just feels like a much, much, much cleaner run defense than anything we've seen in previous seasons. And, Brandon Staley kept saying at the press conference that, just how impressed he was with the overall, integrity of the defense and just the fact that they are playing the run this well was exactly why they were, doing as good in the rush game and the pass rush game as they were, right? So I think that kind of goes into that like synchronous football where if you're playing one phase really well on defense, then it kind of translates to the rest of your defense, and whether you're playing the run or the pass. So I thought that was, just really nice to see. Really, like, again, like I would say, the first complete wire-to-wire defensive performance in a while. You can qualify it and say, oh, Zach Wilson, oh, Jets O-line. But I've seen the Chargers have worse games against, sort of worse circumstances, to be honest. So just to have everyone back healthy, firing, and kind of gaining positive momentum just in terms of like stringing the types of performances they are in the secondary and as the pass rush together, like that, I think is the biggest thing. And the fact that we're not looking at like Kenneth Murray or Eric Kendricks, as we have maybe in previous years with Murray in particular, and being like, ooh, they're a liability, right? Like Kenneth Murray's played really well. So I think that that's a big part of this too, even though not that like either of them made like a tremendous amount of plays tonight, but the fact that they have stability in that linebacker group and kind of trust them to do things, I think was a big part of why they kind of were able to have this type of defensive performances. So again, probably the best Chargers defensive performance at all three levels, maybe since the Miami game of 2022. So hats off to the Staley. I know we all kind of give shit to Staley a lot here. And, I think at times he has absolutely deserved it this season. But, when he comes out with a game like this, it gives you like that feeling that there is something there to what this guy can do when he has some of the resources available to him from an injury standpoint, and frankly, when he's not getting in his own way sometimes. So it was just a really promising game to see from him, especially considering like how south the season could have gone at various points, when it was as bad as it was. Let's shift to talking about the offense. I did want to, I guess, start with Justin Herbert, because I saw a lot of this discourse on Twitter. He ends up finishing with 16 for 30, 136 yards. Got sacked 5 times. I want to say the Jets had, if I'm correct, I think 13 quarterback hits. Yeah, the Jets ended up having 13 quarterback hits on Justin Herbert. Previously against the Bears last week, Justin Herbert only got pressured 8 times. So from a week-to-week perspective, definitely a very different thing going up against this Jets rush, where they can send 3 rushers, 4 rushers at you and get the amount of pressure that they're getting. And they did that with Jermaine Johnson on a bunch of plays. They did that with really, all their linebackers and defensive linemen, and kind of worked that well together. You had guys like Bryce Huff come up. You had guys like Quincy Williams have like a pretty good game in that regard. So, John Franklin Myers ended up having 3 quarterback hits, which, I didn't even necessarily know watching the game, but like everybody was just really consistent in terms of, just being in there on Herbert. And unfortunately, I'll talk about this in a second after I talk about the Herbert game. This was one of the worst offensive line games in a minute. But yeah, I guess just starting with Herbert, right? I think Herbert did what he needed to do. Obviously, you look at 136 yards, and opposing fan bases or whatever who didn't watch the game are going to be like, "Oh, Herbert shit the bed this time." But like, I didn't think it was his best game by any means. But this was, again, kind of the game Herbert needed to have given the circumstances, right? And I think when you consider the early lead that the Chargers took and the fact that they were up 14-0, 17-6 at various points in this game, if you're going to try to like kind of play hero ball and like put the ball in harm's way, like that's going to really put you at a disadvantage. I think we saw this with Josh Allen in week 1 against the Jets, where it just felt like he was like trying to go for the big play every time on that Jets defense. And then I would even say, as someone who extensively watched the Jalen Hurts against the Jets game, where, he was comfortable for stretches in that game, but the pass rush and the Jets secondary never let him get too comfortable, right? And when, the Eagles need one throw to close that game out, Jalen Hurts is kind of baited into one of the worst interceptions that he's thrown in a while, and the Eagles kind of end up throwing that game away. So I think it's true what Staley said in his press conference, that like, hey, we didn't turn the ball over, and that's huge. I think for the Chargers to win the turnover battle, we talk about like the turnover margin and stuff like that, and the Chargers were one of the top 5 teams entering turnover margin this week at +6. So, for them to kind of continue taking care of the football, I think was a good thing, especially considering the circumstances. Now, if you have this kind of game against Detroit or Baltimore, considering the potency of those offenses, I do think that kind of will end up, yielding more severe consequences. But considering the game that they needed to have, and, not letting the Jets get back into it by throwing a pick that immediately puts them in the red zone and stuff like that. I think that's a really smart game on Herbert's part. Definitely could have been a lot more efficient. Even some of the passes he kind of like airmailed. I mean, Keenan kind of ended up coming down with that crazy one where he like ends up making this like circus catch, but it wasn't the best Justin Herbert thrown ball, if you will. So look, there can absolutely be criticism of his game. 41.1 QBR, 65.4 passer rating for Herbert tonight. But I think ultimately, considering the circumstances, this game could have been a lot worse for him, right? If he was baited into a bad turnover early, or just kind of had that more. We saw how Zach Wilson kind of managed the game tonight, and if Herbert had been kind of stripped into some of those fumbles or just didn't take care of the football very much, then this game could have potentially swung early for the Jets in a different way, right? What if they go up 7-0 or 14-0 early, and then it's the Chargers like fighting back, trying to play hero ball, much like Josh Allen was in week 1, like I mentioned. So again, I don't think Herbert was perfect today, but and probably knows that he could have played better, and we'll know that once he's watched the film from this game. But overall, I thought Herbert, for the purposes of what this game needed to be, was fine. Let's talk about the rush game or the running game as a whole. At what point do we start having a conversation about Eckler? Because coming into this game, regardless of which analytic model you looked at or PFF chart, whatever it is, Eckler's been rated as one of the least efficient running backs in the league. And he did have the one long 20-yard run that put them in touchdown position. That drive ends up resulting in a score for the Chargers. So he breaks off 2 big runs on that drive. But the rest of the game, if you were to eliminate that 20-yard run, like I said, Eckler ends up running for the other 13 carries for 27 yards. So the run game, like as a whole, just wasn't very efficient tonight. Joshua Kelly kind of got his 3 carries for 18 yards. Herbert had a couple runs here and there, but still just like not where like it needs to be. And so you look at the final numbers being 21 carries for 84 yards. And I think they got a lot of that kind of early in the game. But again, it feels like if they had been playing a better offense tonight, than the Zach Wilson situation with the Jets, then I think that the lack of a run game really could have cost them in terms of like trying to close out the game, trying to finish it. And it's something that gives me pause going into the Lions game, the Ravens game, where I don't really trust Eckler as the lead back. I don't trust the offensive line to block for him. And when you put all these things together, like I think in those games more than this one, you're going to be asking Justin Herbert to bail you out in a lot of those situations. And, I don't think that's the greatest formula for winning per se, when you could have 2, complete phases on the ground and in the air on offense. So I don't know. I still don't think the run game's fixed. Even though like stats wise, this won't look as bad for Eckler in the final box score as much as Chicago did, and it won't look as bad for the run game as a whole. But I still have some pretty serious questions about what they're doing. I think they've messed up some of like the run, messed up some of the run fits sometimes in terms of like where guys are supposed to be and where guys are supposed to pull. So yeah, I'll just be curious to see again when they start going kind of against better offenses, like how much this lack of a run game kind of kills them. And we already kind of saw it against the Chiefs, and to some extent against Dallas, where they weren't very efficient on the ground from play to play, and it ended up kind of killing them in both of those games. So that's, I guess, my main concern going forward. So, but overall, like again, I don't think this was a dynamic night for the offense. Shout out to Keenan Allen, 8 receptions, 77 yards. Breaking the record on that crazy circus catch. He, I think, needed to be really good tonight, and he was. I definitely think that momentum he got before the halftime, where the Chargers were able to get that field goal because of the 2 Herbert completions to Keenan Allen. Those were, I think, really important in terms of just kind of like getting him going a little bit. And then you saw that a little bit in the second half where the Chargers were just able to extend drives a little bit more because they had Keenan Allen and what he was doing. So great night for him. And obviously, with Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston out, Josh Palmer and Mike Williams out, I wanted to mention this with Herbert's game too, and the way that he played, because obviously, now that receiving core is Keenan Allen, Quentin, Darius Davis, Jalen Guyton. Guyton in his first game back gets 2 targets, held off of the score sheet for the most part. That bomb potential wasn't really there, but really, the only constant contributors for Herbert right now, in this game, were Allen, Eckler, Everett, and Johnston from play to play. And so I think when the Chargers can't quite be as multiple as they wanted to be on offense, especially without Palmer, and you felt the loss of their, you felt the depth of their receiving core kind of wane in this game. It's going to affect obviously how they play. But at the same time, I think that this, when we talk about the offense as a whole, it was better. I think then, I think you'll look at the Chicago game, and Chicago's defense is obviously shit. But I think the Chargers kind of got a little bit of positive momentum in terms of, what the offense kind of ended up looking, because they had a sequence in the game where I think after they had gotten the touchdown, they went 4 straight punts before halftime, then got the ball back also before halftime and turned it into that field goal. And so I think that was, really important for the Chargers. And then 2 of the next 4 drives end up being field goal on a 68-yard drive, and then touchdown on the Jets fumble recovery. So, I don't think by any means this was the best offensive game for them, but I think, it was interesting to see them kind of struggle in the first half a little bit after they got that touchdown, and then kind of have some answers before halftime, and then take that into the second half with them and at least get another quality drive out of it, where they ended up picking the field goal up on that drive to Keenan Allen that I mentioned, where Herbert ends up completing that pass. So, overall, I thought this was a so-so offensive game for them considering the circumstances, but if you put up 20 points against the Jets, you give yourself, a chance to win the game. And obviously the Darius Davis touchdown helped. And shout out to Ryan Ficken tonight. I know we don't necessarily always talk about Ficken on the show, but I will talk about Ficken as much as I get a chance to. Obviously gets the punt return touchdown with Darius Davis, which I kept saying this when he was drafted. Everyone's like, oh, he overdrafted. Why would you spend a 4th round pick on that? And I'm like, they have the best punt returner, kick returner in college football coming into the pros. To me, even though you're not going to use Darius Davis, his utility as a receiver as much because of the role he's going to be playing on special teams, if he's able to flip fields consistently and be as good as he's been this year, just in terms of the return game, and he had another 20-yard return, I think, or 15, 20-yard return after he got that touchdown too. It's just such a big advantage to not, for the Chargers to not think about, oh, who's our returner going to be? And we saw that in so many previous seasons in the kick return, punt return game, where it's oh, well, we're really struggling. Should we plug in Nas Adderley into the return spot? He's got a little bit of speed. So for the Chargers to just have an identity there and just have one guy that you can trust, I think is such a huge thing in the special teams game. And shout out Cameron Dicker as well. He ends up hitting in the 55-yard field goal, ends up tying his career long from that Chiefs game. And, he's been exceptional this season. I don't even know what the Cam Dicker final, percentage numbers are. I guess I could look that up on ESPN real quick, but he's just been, kind of a revelation for this Chargers team, just in terms of being able to trust your kicker from 50 yards out. They have not had that guy really in a while. And that was always the question, I guess, with Dicker coming into this year, because they didn't make him take many 50-yard field goals last year. And so, here against the Jets, oh, no, I don't think his numbers are up from the game yet. All right. Well, I'll try to find it on ESPN. But no, I think overall this was a really nice Cameron Dicker game. And nice J.K. Scott game too, where he, hang timed a couple of punts, and, essentially made it so the Jets couldn't get any, momentum going in the return game. So yeah, Dicker ended up having 2 for 2 on field goals, 3 for 3 on extra points. And yeah, overall, just a really solid game from his standpoint. Um, yeah, ends up, essentially, I wonder what his numbers are for the year, because I only remember, is it 1 field goal that he missed? I was just trying to see his stats for the whole season, but Dicker is, let me just see his 2023 kicking stats. Sorry, not as prepared for this segment as I probably should be. He is, let me look at the game log just to put this all together. Yeah, so he is now, I think, 13 for 14 on field goals for the regular season, 22 for 22 on extra points, which I think is really big. 92.9% field goal percentage, I think, has got to be the highest since Dicker last year in terms of a Chargers kicker. If he keeps up at the pace he's at, and the big thing is that he's 4 or 5 from 50 plus yards. That's absolutely massive for somebody like Dicker. And, it just makes the Chargers play offense differently as a whole when they know they have a guy that can hit like that in Kansas City on the road at MetLife today. So big game from him, big game from special teams coverage standpoint and J.K. Scott and special teams returning standpoint. So Darius Davis, just had to shout out the man Ryan Ficken real quick, because, he was awesome today as a whole. So final thoughts. Do I think that this Chargers team is fixed? No, but I think that you can tell that they're playing a lot looser. I think this was the best, Staley game plan game in a while. The defense is obviously playing a lot more free and playing a lot more healthy, and you can tell that with guys like Bosa that I mentioned, Derwin and Alohi, sort of being healthy at the same time. And then on offense, they just played the game that they needed to, and they protect the football. Right. They're going to need more than that again against the Lions and the Ravens. And there's a lot of things, including the run game still, that needs to be cleaned up going forward. But I thought in terms of a road game at MetLife, playing a really good, well-coached team against the Jets, this is as well as the Chargers could have kind of asked for. I know people want the offense 3 touchdown, 300-yard Herbert type game. But if you would watch the Jets game this season, if you'd watch the Jets play this season, you knew that wasn't coming, and they were going to have to win this game a little ugly on offense relative to how they, usually play. So hopefully they get some more positive momentum on offense coming up in these Lions and Ravens games, and Kellen Moore comes up with some better game plans, more creativity. That is kind of one thing. I did think he was a little bit of a drag tonight relative to some of the, play calling he had been doing. But yeah, overall, great win for the Chargers. And I hope that this, gets some momentum for them going forward. I said on Twitter that I am not quite all the way back in yet. I still need to see a little bit more to believe. And, if you beat Detroit next week, I think maybe I'll start posting some of those, playoff percentage chances. I stopped that for a while because I'm like, they're 2-4 and they're not playing super well. But now you're back to 4-4. You've given your season a chance, and I think that's all you can ask for your Staley or just this team as a whole. So thought that this was, a really big step in the positive direction tonight. So leave a like, subscribe, hit the bell as well, whatever YouTube terminology I have to do to boost the algorithm. And I'll respond to you guys in the comments as always. And bolt up. Fuck the Jets. I don't know. What thing can I come up with against the Jets this week? North Jersey. I'm a South Jersey, Central Jersey guy. North Jersey is just a terrible place as a whole. Sorry, Arjun.